Welcome to the Yahowah vlog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. It's always fun to begin a new series. This, however, will be the most interesting one I think I have ever delivered, and we have done many. The series is called The Last Word Picture, a Mashal, which is a proverb, the final of the 31 that was written. This one was conceived by Dowd. He is the narrator of what is the most surprising twist in the plot of God's story. One I had not foreseen, one that will perhaps shake many of you to your core. One that I hinted at as we talked all around it during our family hour presentation on Friday evening, just a few nights ago. And it was then that I made the promise that on Monday, which is today, that we would tell you the rest of the story. And I don't want to disappoint. The last Mashal, which means word picture, is personal, powerful, and it is also prophetic. It paints a portrait of a lost child, of a husband and wife, of a father and mother's love for a son who has gone astray and lost his way. It is the story of a Melech, king, Baal, husband, and Asher, beneficial and blessed woman, from an entirely different perspective. This is indeed the surprise intervention in God's story that no one could have ever expected. And yet it explains everything that we have considered heretofore. The relationship would have to be mended before a reputation could be restored. We must redeem this man before he redeems the world. And of this man, I am speaking of my life's mission. That is of restoring the reputation of Dowd, the actual Messiah and Son of God, our Savior, the chosen one, our returning King. Turns out, however, long before I would engage to restore his reputation, I would engage, along with my wife, to redeem this man's character, reestablishing his trust before God. We are redeeming the Redeemer. The final word picture is a real shocker. As a matter of fact, on these last few days, I have, written and rewritten the prelude that I'm going to share with you probably 5 times. And part of that is because we must wrap our minds around the very nature of time and this continuum of time that allows it to progress forward but never backward. And how it was possible for someone to be interjected into time in such a way that the progress of time is kept on the path that Yahowah desires without ever interrupting that picture in a way that changes cause and effect. And we'll get to that later, either in this program or one of the subsequent episodes of The Last Word Picture. So this is unexpected, as are the prophetic texts which Yahowah will use to frame it. Very bad had become much worse, and things had begun to spiral out of control. The foremost son pushed his father so far out of his life, he couldn't even bear to say his name. The relationship was so fractured There was only one way to resolve it, and even that was a risky proposition because of the relative status of the implements Yahowah would choose to deploy and mend this rift. At this moment, our Heavenly Father knew that he was stymied and he needed help. That's hard to say. And every time I say something like that, I almost shudder inside. But it's a realization that Yahowah has made self-evident. God's issues with his son had become so serious, so isolating and debilitating. They were not communicating and could not do so since Yahowah couldn't directly intervene without compromising his core values. So God would reach forward in time or just insert into time. A mother and father who knew him and his son, loved by both of them, but who had also suffered similarly, would chide the king and as a result, take him out of his stupor. Dowd needed parenting. He needed a mother and father, a husband and wife, two servants of Yah, who, unlike most, weren't afraid to tell the Melech, the king, and the Bakor of El, the firstborn of God, what he needed to hear. They would be inserted in his time and just in time for there to be time. This is also the story of time. It would not be easy, of course. The king was as stubborn and as irascible as his people. This would be a lifetime endeavor. It would not begin, nor would it end with this encounter, because the husband and wife, surrogate, mother and father, who would serve Dowd in this way, will continue in this role forevermore. As the story progresses, we find that Yahowah's Amah, an interesting Hebrew word. I will define it most completely and accurately as productive mother, got the king's attention, and she woke him up. But her voice was too soft to prevail with a man who didn't respect women. I don't say that to be disrespectful, but to point out the fact that Dowd didn't know his mother, and he hadn't made stellar choices in wives. And so Yahowah arranged the 1-2 punch of the husband following his wife, the adoptive father after the foster mother, to get his son's attention. But we're getting a wee bit ahead of our story. And I don't want to drive an exceptional, life-altering point home prematurely, because there are limitations. And it's difficult to speak openly and confidently about limitations on what Yahowah can achieve, because it suggests that we are somehow constraining him. But in this case, should we cease respecting him and contravene the conditions that he has laid out, or we withdraw from the relationship, there's very little Yahowah can do. You know, God's great. His existence is independent of ours. Yahowah did not solicit our help in creating the universe, and there was no consult when he decided to author life. But once he made us, there was no way to develop a beneficial relationship without our participation, in addition to our respect. It's actually vital in this regard that this insight resonate within you. Please Don't allow it to pass you by as simple reverberations in the air or words lost with others on a page should you be reading this as opposed to just listening to this vlog. What I'm sharing with you is actually the grand unification theory of our very existence. It reveals the means to make your life meaningful. Simply stated, a one-sided relationship is actually a contradiction of terms. It's an oxymoron. It is neither beneficial nor is it sustainable. Therefore, for God to continue to engage with us, we must return the favor. And we must do so appropriately, intelligently, respectfully, and without compulsion. For the Beryth, which is the crown jewel of the Towrah, to be meaningful, mutually enjoyable, and productive, either side must be able to opt out, and neither party can compel the other to honor the terms of the agreement. And God ceases to be himself should he grovel for our attention, should he bribe us for favors, should he change the conditions, alter the benefits, or compromise on his principles. He cannot become less than he is just because he wants to make us more than we are. He cannot become less than he is just because he wants to make us more than we are. And therein was his dilemma with Dowd. He had put himself out of reach, as had the children of Israel throughout the Exodus and thereafter. So let's be blunt, shall we? Since the covenant is predicated on a mutually beneficial relationship, unless we are willing to make an ongoing contribution to the family and engage with our Father, Yahweh can't save us. We not only make our salvation possible when we participate, but also desirable. And as a bonus, we encourage others to engage by sharing what we are learning along the way. To achieve the result God desired, Yahweh would have to save his creation by working through those he had conceived. Moshe and Dowd are prime examples, as are a couple of others. But this only works when we work. God's approach necessitated one of the most poignant lines in the Towrah. After the children of Israel told Yahweh that they didn't want to hear his voice or witness his fiery light ever again, and that their preference was for him to address them through one of their own, this was Yahweh's response. For the benefit of the relationship, Asher, they will be better off and more successful, Yahab, based upon what they have said, Dabar. For the benefit of the relationship, they will be better off and more successful based upon what they have said. Dabarim words, Deuteronomy 18:17. Think about that. What God is saying is that if he speaks directly to us, rather than through one of us, that the relationship will be infringed, that it will have a less likelihood of being successful. A God who is brilliant in the sky, whose voice is booming, who cannot be ignored, is not the stuff of loving relationships. That for the benefit of the relationship that God desired with us, we were better off and we would be more successful. When God spoke through us, through one of us, to all of us. Stunningly profound. I don't think there's one person in a million that has a full appreciation of what God said through Moshe in Debadim, Deuteronomy 18:17. In our present state, we're just too different. We are. We're too far apart. Too inferior in intellect and capability, as well as dimensions and in time. Therefore, God is on record stating that he would intervene and communicate through select individuals. Of course, we know their names and something about their lives. Adam and Noach and his family. Abraham and Sarah. Ishak and Rebekah. Jacob and Leah. The children who became Yisrael. Moshe and Aaron. Yosha and Samuel. Dowd and Nathan. Shalomo and Hezekiah. With the Nakar arriving in the end. They were buttressed by a remarkable group of prophets, Ruth and Deborah, Yeshaya and Yirmiah, Eliah and Eliah, Hosea and Micah, Chabauk and Zephaniah, who were followed by Zechariah, Yoel, and Malachi. And while there were others, many influential, some were different, and that they weren't restricted to a single earthly and heavenly existence, particularly Dowd and Eliah, the Nakar, observant foreigner, and his wife, Leah, the last two of whom have been inserted periodically into the timeline. Now that, my friends, is also profound. I came up with this conclusion because I don't think it's possible to go back in time and interact, because it would alter the future from which the individual came, destroying the natural progression of cause and effect. You would destroy the fabric of the universe if you did so. And yet, occasionally, Yahowah needs to be able to guide certain people at precise intersections of time to keep his overall plan of reconciliation from being thwarted by a misdirected series of events, such that they spiral out of control. For example, Noach had to be in the right place at the right moment with the right approach to salvage the human experience, such that the mother of the ark's family was very likely the Amah, the productive mother that's discussed in so many of these prophecies. Someone had to encourage Noach to break free of man's way and to listen to God's approach, and then engage to salvage Nasalma Adam, man with a conscience, after Towrah had failed. Moving forward in time and closer to her roots, Leah had to counteract Rachel and influence Jacob, or there would be no Yehud to reconcile Yisrael. The Amah, productive mother, would spare Moshe when he was set adrift in the genocidal realm of Mitzrayim. Moshe was essential to God's plan to liberate Yisrael and to deliver the Towrah. And if he had not received the benefit of the stated and declared Amah, productive mother, this would not have occurred. And there was no way to replace Moshe. He alone was prepared to serve in this capacity. Saving him, sparing him, required intervention. And that the one who intervened was literally called an Amah. Well, we'll get into this in a moment. Should you be curious, is written exactly like M in Hebrew. It's a Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but unlike El, which is the Aleph and Lamed, the shepherd's staff, or M, mother, is the Aleph followed by the Hebrew symbol, the M, the Mem, which conveys water. Water as the ultimate solvent to wash away our grime, to cleanse and bathe us in motherly fashion, and in motherly fashion to give us new life. That's M, mother. And the ending, I can't in this case mean that the mother is feminine, because that would be verbose, wouldn't it? She is the mother who is a woman. No. What we've learned about the ending of so many Hebrew words is that they make whatever is being discussed far more productive. The etz becomes an etzah. The tree is shown as the productivity of the complete picture as conveyed by the tree of knowledge. The Adam that becomes Adamah is a particularly productive man. The bull, becomes parah to demonstrate the productivity and the fruitfulness of the bull. It's consistent all the way through. And so the Amah is the most productive of mothers. Based upon the rhetoric, it would become evident that Yahweh selected this feminine influence that inspired Ruth. She was a harbinger of things to come. She even admitted that she was the Amah, the productive mother, saying it twice. And then she overtly conveyed that she would deliver the Gaal, the kinsman redeemer, on behalf of Boaz, her exceptionally strong husband. More on that too in a moment. The Amah would return in her most acclaimed role as Yahweh's esteemed and productive mother when she saved Dowd from himself. And this is the essence of the final word picture. It is among the most poignant of prophecies, and it is responsible for opening our eyes to what we should have seen and recognized previously. Or perhaps it was less for us to view in the end, because it is the conclusion, a final piece of the frame for the portrait that God is painting. There are, of course, hints of the Amah in Deborah as the judge and prophet who inspired Israel to man up and stand up to tyranny and oppression. And Yahweh's Amah is Leah today, creating the covenant family alongside her husband, Yada. The 31st Mashal is her story, just as it is the picture of Dowd's recovery. I'm sure those of you who are listening know that Yada is introduced as the lesser luminary and then described as the tree of knowledge, with him being tethered to Dowd on both occasions. I think Yahweh introduced how he intends to deploy him with, when he presented Enoch, he was and then he was not. God took him. Well, Enoch really isn't a name. It's more of a depiction. It means mortal man. And God's depiction of him is that there would be a mortal man who would be interjected into God's plan at crucial moments and then removed, only to be deployed as needed along the way. He is seen ever so briefly as my Dowd, prophesying alongside Dowd at a critical juncture for Moshe, only to disappear once the point was made. He is very likely Obed-Edom, as the Ark of the Covenant is being relocated, because he becomes the man from Edom to save many through this ark 3,000 years thereafter. I see him as someone who may have whispered in the ear of Nathan, the prophet who spoke to Dowd once Yahowah stopped communicating directly with his son. There are uniquely judgmental tones in the manner of Yada, in the bold interactions of Joab, Yah is my father, as he counseled the wayward king following the suppression of the Absalom revolt. He is likely showing Yahweh's paternal side. In this regard, it has become apparent to me that I am the one responsible for telling Dowd who he is and what he'd accomplish following his encounter with Yahweh's Amah here in the final word picture. Now, you're free to disagree, of course, but prior to me putting all of the clues together to form and frame Yahweh's portrait of his son, no one on earth was aware of any of this. And nothing is more important pursuant to the reconciliation of mankind with God. So based upon my unique understanding of it and love for it, I wouldn't be surprised that Yahowah reinserted me to record the glorious lyrics of the 89th Mizmor. As Yada, I am the Nakar, the observant foreigner of Devarim 29, who Moshe revealed would arrive to oppose the religiosity of Israel as the final messenger to his people. He foretold that I would come as the world returns to the conditions experienced in Sodom and is scorched thereafter as a result. Think of that. Therefore, I am also the Nakar, observant foreigner, of whom Shalomo, Dowd's son, spoke when offering the commemoration address for the home of Yahweh's name, doing so on Taruwah in 961 BCE, as it is presented in 2 Chronicles, Words of the Days, 6. Yahowah spoke of me in his vivid portrayal of the Choter, as he would replace Dowd's father in Yeshayah 11. In addition to affirming that he would enable our collaboration with his Ruach, of course, God equated me to the tree of knowledge in the garden, promising that I would be a parah, productive bull, in that same introduction. As a result, I returned with Dowd to support the Messiah as he delivered and I explained the sweeping prophecies presented in Babylon to Daniel in 555 BCE. In that portrayal, he is Gabriel, God's most courageous man, while I am Mikael, the one who is right about God. After all, I was the first to unveil the meaning of these prophecies and generate the timeline, as everything that was foretold is now playing out before our very eyes. Now, moving to our day, I have written extensively, sharing everything the world needs to know about Yahowah, about Dowd, and about their imminent return just 7.5 years from now. as a result of my 35 books on Yahowah's testimony. Books like this one, part of the Coming Home series that share insights regarding Dowd's life and lyrics, all revealing who God is and who he is not. I'm the only one who has been more insightful and verbose than Moshe, Dowd, or even Yahowah, having written 25,000 pages based upon my translations and insights into the very testimony of God. And I'm doing so married to Yahowah's Amah, productive mother, as is made undeniable in the final word picture. Yahowah and Dowd present Yada as this woman's husband. Now, these are my thoughts as I've contemplated the prophetic pretext to the last Mashal. Oh, I know who I am. I know where I've been and where Yahowah intends to go with all of this. And I know my wife, who Yahowah says is the greatest of all women, the mother to his covenant family. Your interpretation of this material is up to you. My job is to find and explain it. Yours is to apply what I've discovered as you see fit. Now, returning to the star attraction, when the most select of us, Dowd, deselected himself, Yahowah did as he promised. He dispatched a woman and then her husband to talk some sense into the boy who had abandoned his calling. God needed to do so, for had he not done so, there would have been no hope for humankind. It was that serious. The cornerstone upon which the covenant home would be constructed was cracked and crumbling. Please consider the gravity of this situation before we press on. Billions of men have acted badly and have stolen another's wife. 1 million even have had a husband killed to secure the deal. But this wasn't an ordinary king. He was the future savior of the world. And yet no one knew it at the time, including the king himself. The solution to Yahowah's savior problem wouldn't be an easy fix, as simple as dialing up a contemporary, because Dowd wasn't listening. There was no way to prevail at this time because no one on the planet had any clue as to what Dowd would have to achieve to salvage the human experiment. And that wouldn't be known for another 30 centuries, from the time of Dowd's egregious offense. And even then, it would be another score of years thereafter for someone to finally come to recognition that the king was also slated to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim in his second of 3 lives in 33 CE. 4 years thereafter, the same man had his wife direct his attention to the last word picture. So here we are, the subject of an arranged marriage by Yahowah, and likely for this very purpose. And as I have shared previously, on the very day we were celebrating our 8th anniversary. Her name was Lisa, but I renamed her Leah. She was abandoned by her father at birth. Her mother was psychotic and abusive. She suffered several miscarriages prior to adopting the daughter of the alcoholic and unfaithful man who also abandoned her, only to have her adopted daughter rebuff her love. perfectly prepared for this job. As for us, we connected online a decade before we actually met because she was trying to access why Ruth, Dowd's great-grandmother, referred to herself as an Amah, productive mother. At the time, her opening question to me was the same one she posed to Dowd in the 31st Mashal. She did so to find out why I was translating the Torah and prophets, because in my books, which were posted online, she noted that I had written extensively about the feminine attributes associated with the Ruach. Our mutual intellectual curiosity blossomed long before we met and fell passionately in love. And not just with one another, but with the Torah, its Beryth, the Moedim, Yahowah, and also Dowd. As for me, my father was so abusive, I had to get a restraining order against him. My mother proved useless in this regard. My eldest son turned against me as I was working to protect, enable, and enrich him. His actions were so vile, after confronting him to no avail, I was determined to never speak to him or see him again. It had all progressed as was required to be properly equipped to engage in something quite similar and to resolve the dispute between Yahowah and his son. I could empathize. But of course, there's always more to the story. 24 years prior to this moment, Yahowah introduced himself and asked me to work with him. I went to Towrah school thereafter, with Yahowah as my professor and his Ruach as my tutors, investing over 100,000 hours of observation and contemplation. For a decade of that time, Leah was an email away. And for the next 8, she was at my side. In sharing what we were learning, we became inseparable, with all of the synergy of an ideal marriage. The growing covenant family is the result, and our children. It wasn't a surprise to Yah. He knew it would all play out this way. So confident was he that God began sharing the ultimate flashback in his story long, long ago, speaking of it prophetically as far back as the opening chapters in the Torah. Yes, it was prophetic. The two people who came to love and respect father and son, Yahowah and Dowd, more than any other, devoting their lives to restoring the reputations that the religious had purloined. They would answer the call because they were listening. And of course, they were willing. It isn't every day that two otherwise ordinary people get to save the world, but we have. In our service to father and son, we restored the relationship that Dowd, our king, had fractured. You'll read and listen to Leah's response in Mashal 31, and then Dowd's reply in Mizmor 51. And reviewing them, I thought that my wife's was brilliant, really, with her discussion with the king, telling her adopted son what he needed to hear. But as it turns out, he needed a father too. He needed a dose of tough love with a side of unrelenting judgment. Well, I think that it was my wife's words that ultimately mattered and resonated with him, especially when I reinforced them. He came around and wrote the 116th Mizmor on the way out of the mess that he had made for himself. King Dowd would go on to fulfill the Moedim, and the lesser luminary would reflect his brilliance. for having done so. But this is the backstory to those events. After our discussion, Dowd would write and speak through his Mizmor and Mashal, affirming that he understood his purpose and was in complete concurrence with the reasons behind what I had shared with him. He knew why he should fulfill these spring mikre. And I would thereafter write the Tree of Knowledge to turn Yisrael's attention to the man who became the Tree of Lives. And now on the cusp of Shavuot, an anticipation of Taruwah, Dowd's adoptive father knows that he will be laying down his life to facilitate the Son of God's return. Yes, the story comes full circle. For the first time, I am now positioned to understand the reference to Yishai, pursuant to the Choder. He was a jerk. Dowd deserved better. You may not think I am, but God does. And so I'm replacing Yishai. Let me share that with you. God said, a Choder stem, a shoot or secondary branch, a sprout as a sucker, a pliable wooden implement as a standard of measure, a secondary source of growth serving as a living entity delivering progeny by being observant, willing to listen, and committed to thinking, while collecting the things Yah values as a means to project himself in association with a tree, will be extended. Yasha will be brought forth to serve out of the stump which has been cut down, so that it is capable of supporting new growth of Yishai, to stand out and be noticed, drawing attention to the very substance of existence as a Netzir, an observant branch, by means of its roots and that which keeps it anchored, steadfast, and nourished, such that he will continually bear an abundance of fruit, being a productive bull, while encouraging productivity in others. Perah. That's Yeshayah, Isaiah 11:1. Yishai was the fallen stump that was cut down for the Netzar observant branch to be extended as the Choder, the stem, revitalizing the roots that had gone dormant over time. Yahowah would assure that Yisrael would become productive again at long last. So that you have an appreciation for the mess that Dowd had made for himself, be aware that even the worst of what we do can be resolved, at least up to the point that it changes who we are, compromises our relationship with Yahowah, or somehow misdirects our attention. And when the errors in judgment are serious and compounded, when they are committed by someone who, for of all people, should have known better, and when they negate the credibility and corrupt the judgment of the man chosen for the most important role in human history, the problem becomes catastrophic unless it's resolved. What Dowd did was so horrific. Yahowah was compelled to not only step away, distancing himself from his son. He had to publicly rebuke the man he loved most of all. Unfortunately, I should say, Dowd just didn't respond very well to criticism, even from God. And like Adam before him, he tried to hide from God. Then, in the inverse of Moshe, who begged God to kill him because, well, the children of Israel were impossible to lead, Dowd was convinced that he had brought certain death, even hell, upon himself. He managed to confuse what he would do to negate these effects with what he had done to deserve them. This was bad. And there was nothing God could do by himself to resolve the problem for all the reasons we have already considered. And so Yahweh's resolution would be delivered by working through his creation to save all humankind. In so doing, this approach provides a window to understand the resolution that God provided throughout the Torah and the prophets, even to this day, one that is based upon that stunningly important declaration that I shared with you at the beginning of this program, that Yahweh recognized that speaking through men would be more effective in developing the relationship he desired with his people than speaking directly to them. God's approach, while fraught with the potential for human failure, was the only way he felt, within the constraints that he had established and the opportunity he wanted to accomplish, to restore our fallen condition in a manner capable of earning Yahweh's trust. It is what God wants most from each of us. We are nothing in God's eyes until he perceives that he can trust us. And the test isn't to be perfect, because God wants us to stumble and fall so that we can demonstrate the resolve to rise. After all, in the garden, it was God who caused the fall of man, because ultimately it is only when we have fallen that we can demonstrate the character to stand back up again. Adam didn't, but we can. And it's only when we make mistakes that we can learn from them and grow beyond them. And his imperfections make Dowd the perfect example of this. Looking back in time, there was no way for the Almighty under these conditions to resolve his conflict with Adam. So Eden was shuttered. It is why Yahweh couldn't deal with the Nephilim, and he chose the flood. This explains why he toppled Babel rather than negotiating with the religious. It is why he could narrate the covenant with Abraham, but couldn't form it without his son. It is why Moshe felt so alone and lacked the will and strength to prevail against the onslaught of naysayers, well, at least until shown El Dowd and my Dowd. Prior to their arrival, there would be no one prepared and willing to intervene, to bring Yahweh's message down to earth, and to be resolute in defense of our God and of his way. Therefore, in light of what I'm going to share as we progress from one episode to another of the last word picture, it is apparent that Adam, Moshe, and Dowd struggled and fell for the same reason: the lack of parental support and guidance. Yahweh longs to fulfill this role, and he will one day, when we are released into the seventh dimension. But here on earth, he is too far beyond us to serve in this capacity. He knows that overwhelming us only adds to our consternation and anxiety, as it did during the Exodus when Israel asked Yahweh to shut up and go away. So in a way, my friends, we are all Adam, and no one is more so than Dowd. Now Moshe is retired, but the king, he's not. To succeed in his return, he would need what he did not have in the beginning: a devoted human mother and father to guide and support him. And as a result, the 31st Mashal, the final word picture, begins with an intervention. A remarkable woman who was introduced elsewhere as Yahowah's Amah, productive mother, is inserted at this time to counsel her adoptive son. This intercession was required because Yahowah had become so distraught over Dowd's lack of respect and judgment that they were not on speaking terms. And they had not been for 14 years. The king was languishing in his time out for bad behavior. To recover and save the world, he needed the counsel of a right-minded mother, with a supportive father chiming in thereafter to pull him out of the stupor. And so in the concluding proverb, we find Yahowah's resolution to the most debilitating breach of trust in human history. An Oz, strong and Chokmah, wise, mother. In fulfilling her role, she would become the greatest of them all. And so that no one takes this where it does not belong. Well, Yahowah is setting my dear and beloved wife up as the exemplar of a mother paired with a father, a husband and wife in the covenant family. The example that God is having her set is not the example that the religious or political or humans without a more comprehensive view of God would expect. She isn't here to model perfect behavior. God wouldn't want that. In fact, he would discourage it. She's here to model the things that God insists upon if we're going to be trusted to explore the universe with him. She's going to model what it's like to be observant and thoughtful, particularly regarding his Towrah. She's going to be an exemplar when it comes to engaging, responding, and devoting herself to the very things that God's trying to achieve. And she is going to prove that imperfect people can set a perfect example by getting up once they have fallen, by learning from their mistakes and growing as a result of them. This is the example that she is setting for everyone's benefit. So in this presentation, we see Yahowah's literary genius. He is foreshadowing this eventuality many, many times over. But sometimes we're blind. And certainly speaking for myself, I never managed to pick it up, and I know no one else has, even as it was always there in plain sight. It's just like Dowd serving to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim. It's obvious, and yet heretofore no one noticed it. So in fact, it was my wife's urging that caused me to return to the preamble of Bereshith, Genesis 2:24 and 25. It is a statement that's so incongruous at the time, you're wondering, what in the world was God talking about? Why was he even stating such a thing? But now, I'd like you to reconsider this assessment. And as you do, substitute the ultimate man, that would be Dowd, for the first man, Adam, and think of the mother of this Mashal as the woman. Listen, this is really insightful, I think. So Yahweh Almighty, he caused the fall of man. For being somewhat lethargic due to a lack of work and diligence, he slept, inert and inactive, unmotivated and sedentary. And so he grasped hold of one of his ribs, symbolic of that which was limp and lame, from his side. He sutured up and isolated the place beneath it, replacing it over time with a Bashar human herald. Yahweh, as God, he constructed, building a family on behalf of the Son, offering a woman through the rib, removing that which was limp and lame, which he had taken from the man. And he brought her with unfolding implications over time to the man. Then the man said, this is the way to conduct one's life. It's the pattern of behavior to be followed and the motivation to push forward. It is the essential nature and substance of an upright life. Out of my essence and humanity, a living person is able to communicate intelligently, an individual with whom to talk in the flesh, for my desire to share positive thoughts as a herald while still human. For this reason, she shall be welcomed and called, designated, and known as the woman. Because indeed, for man she was selected and obtained. Accordingly, thereafter, a man, this individual male, he will leave, rejecting and forsaking, having been absent from and abandoned by his father and his mother. And then he will engage, becoming close by being joined together with his woman, and they will exist and become a unified declaration regarding heralding the very pronouncements of life. The two, this man and his woman, they were completely exposed without barriers between them, and they were no longer wrong, disapproved, or mistaken. Bereshith in the beginning, Genesis, the 2nd chapter, through the 25th verse. So I'm proposing that these otherwise incongruent statements were actually astute and prophetic. I'm suggesting that they were extended to foreshadow the transformative message of the concluding word picture in Mashal 31. I'm convinced that Yahweh is revealing that he would replace the mother his son never knew, and the father who never knew him, with others who were better equipped to guide the first son through life. Holding on to the concept of azab for a moment longer, we find that its primary meaning is to abandon, forsake, reject, and to be absent. So when prompted by the full implications of azab, it's germane to recognize that Adam and Chawah didn't have a father or mother who they could reject for having been abandoned by them. And by extension, someone far more important to God's story would find themselves in this same position and need replacements. And that would be Dowd. After the king was exposed and rebuked then for having killed a man to steal his wife, Yahweh was so disappointed in his son's response that he needed someone to help the king accept responsibility and right the wrong that would have otherwise precluded him from fulfilling his destiny. Therefore, just as Dowd is the antidote for Adam's lethargy, there would be another woman to replace Chawah, her betrayal, deceit, and lack of support. Call me crazy if you want, but I think this is the message God is delivering in the Towrah and in the Mashal. There are many other suggestions that point to the same conclusion, with some of them arising within Dowd's Mizmor. For example, in the 86, which I'll flesh out completely at a later date, we read, "You want to turn back to me," Dowd is saying to his father Yahowah, "having chosen to appear before me face to face. Your desire is to change your orientation to me and to be present before me. Your desire is to be merciful and kind to me because you have decided to favor and be generous to me. You want to give me what I have emphatically requested, your power, your strength, and your fortification on behalf of your Ebed, your co-worker. You and I want to liberate the son, saving through the son by delivering your Amah, your motherly co-worker, your bondswoman, this female servant, the most productive of women, through whom others are measured. It is equivalent, of course, to Amah, which is cubit, and is the unit of measure from the elbow to the tip of the longest finger, and from M, mother, with the additional suffix indicating the full measure of a woman, a mother, and a co-worker, a servant. Even before the period of estrangement, God had a plan to resolve the biggest crisis of the human experience up to this point. Dowd's 4 failures pursuant to Bathsheba were major obstacles on the elevated path to God. With more than 17 sexual partners, the king of Israel schemed to have sex with a woman married to a very good man who was in the covenant. After getting him or her pregnant, Dowd then plotted to kill her husband. That plan included the man's own father setting him up and then abandoning his son to die. And then, after all of that, Dowd withdrew, becoming a lousy king, a miserable father, and a terrible son. God was so disappointed and distraught over this betrayal that he no longer was even talking with his son. They stood apart. But it could not stay that way, because Dowd is the fulcrum upon which the human experience pivots from death to life, from religion to relationship. If he can't be trusted, and if Yahowah can no longer collaborate to fulfill Chag Matzah, there is no hope for humanity. All 7 Moedim go unfulfilled, and the planet would be destroyed. Yahowah's solution was one I had not considered or anticipated. He would bring 2 people together who would later serve as husband and wife, even as exemplars of the covenant, such that they would devote their lives to conceiving the covenant family. But long before any of that would transpire, he would have her serve as Dowd's adoptive mother, with him as his replacement father. She would be Yahowah's Amah, productive mother and co-worker. In their collaboration, she would serve as the conscience Dowd had misplaced, bringing father and son together again, albeit with an assist from her husband. The Amah would give Dowd the impetus he needed to begin pulling out of his self-imposed exile and funk, making it possible for father and son to face one another again. God would save a man through a woman, and the man would return the favor to save all humankind. As out of the box as it seems, it was always Yahowah's plan. in the next and concluding line of the same psalm, the 86th, we read, "You have acted, engaging with me, such that you working with me serves to provide for me a genuinely good, resolutely moral, and overtly positive sign, a miraculous symbol of femininity, whose attitude and aptitude are productive and beneficial. Then those who have shunned and abhorred me, and those who dislike and slight me, they may choose to see and understand and be ashamed and humiliated for their decision, because you, Yahowah, supported me, helping and assisting me. You came to my aid, and you consoled me, relenting regarding me, reconsidering your disposition toward me." Mizmor, Psalms 86:17. It's the next line. Yahowah's Amah, mother of mothers, would be the Oth La Tobah, the genuinely good, resolutely moral, and overtly positive sign, the miraculous symbol of femininity, whose attitude and aptitude would be productive and beneficial. With this presentation now so prominently displayed, I am asking myself, how did I miss it? How did we all miss it? I've been serving as a herald for the king for 4 years. Yet I didn't see this coming. The Amah is my wife. Well, I'm going to stop here because we next go on to a number of other affirmations, including one that is now almost haunting of me, positive in this regard. But Leah was not Leah when I met her. Her name was Lisa. And as we were falling in love and she wanted to move from a very painful life to a new one that was reassuring and supportive, loving, she asked me to rename her. Not very often a man gets that opportunity. And I did. I named her Leah. And when we return to this program tomorrow, I will share with you how that played out prophetically over time. I thank you for listening. Good night.